And now we're going to hear briefly from Joanna, who's going to come up here and talk a little bit about social services sector has survived and thrived. I haven't used the word pivoted because I refuse to, ever. But you've turned goodwill into action. You're delivering for communities, new alliances, new ways of doing things have emerged with a new focus. We want to bring some of those things together so that you walk out of here with some fairly concrete. We don't want a whinge fest. We want you to walk out with, okay, these are things we could be doing better. This is how we're going to improve our sector. So everyone walks out with some positivity and a real sort of clear direction about what we can do to strengthen this sector and make sure that it's not just sort of something that gets called upon during, a tragedy, but that's something that's there all the time, stronger and stronger. So when things go wrong, you guys are the front line and you're funded like that and you're treated like that. So, Joanna, if you'd like to come up.
So, yes, I now have the difficult task of feeding back what's come out of our 2 days together and some of the key themes and next steps that we want to take forward. I think as a starting point, yesterday someone made the comment that we need to bring sexy back. I think last night, the dancing, the karaoke, the solo performances from John, if nothing else has been achieved, we can tick that box. And Stephen, if the Minister or Treasury says, but what did the SSTF deliver? I think you can say it brought sexy back. But more broadly, we have covered a huge amount of ground over the last couple of days. There have been some really big conversations had and unfortunately no easy answers. My head is certainly spinning and I think we're going to have to spend a bit of time really harvesting the data, as they say, and we have amassed an enormous amount of it in the last 24 hours. But there is definitely plenty of food for thought, some key themes emerging, and I think some really practical steps that we can start taking, if not today, then tomorrow. I've organised these around the themes of our conference, so vision, voice and value. And so this is my first take of it. I'm sure I'm going to leave some things out. When it comes to vision, I think we heard loudly and clearly that our sector has that in spades. It's big and it's important, but the challenge is how do we realise it? And we also heard that those issues around sustainability, diversity and growing need in our communities are ones that we've actually known about for years, but it's the intensity and the scale of the challenge, so much so that we're now at the point where we can't keep hoping that something is going to fix it. And we can't keep doing the same things over and over in the hope that that will fix it. So I think some of the other key things that have come up over the last few days are that there is no cavalry coming. So how we implement or achieve our vision is really up to us. Working harder, trying to do more isn't the answer. I think we also heard that we actually do have power, but we're not always conscious of that and we're not necessarily using it effectively. I think we heard and we agreed that we do need to step back from the busyness to reflect, to determine where are those pressure points, the acupuncture politics that Kathy talked about, and to think about what is that one thing we can do well and that would make a difference. We heard really strongly that we need to invest in collaboration because we do have common issues, common problems, and our strength is in numbers. When we work together, we are so much more powerful. We talked a lot yesterday about invisible infrastructure and social infrastructure. So we need to make the invisible visible. We need to make sure that we pay as much attention to social infrastructure as we do to hard infrastructure. And like Sally Orish, she had to learn to speak engineer in order to be heard and to be taken seriously when fighting for really basic human rights for people who are blind or vision impaired. So we need to learn to speak infrastructure, to make planners, builders, funders and decision makers hear us. And Michaela pointed out that really incongruous situation where we fully fund physical infrastructure like roads without thinking twice about it, but with the social service sector we only ever subsidise and we're expected to fundraise to make up the difference. I think we were also challenged to think about maybe instead of trying to change existing systems, we actually need new ones that operate perhaps in parallel to existing ones. And Paul Gray's statement yesterday that yes, diversity and representation in our existing institutions is something to strive for, but is it enough? Paul, Carly and Naomi told us loud and clear yesterday that settler systems will never deliver optimal outcomes for Aboriginal people. If we keep tinkering with existing systems, are we avoiding the need to fundamentally change those systems? We heard some pretty powerful stories of what it's like to be the change, not waiting for others to change and drawing strength from community in that process. Kathy's was very much a political journey that started small but ended up leading to a fundamental and seismic shift in our political system, all the while focusing on one political acupressure point at a time. Naomi's was a really deeply personal story, embedded in her culture, family history and community, that has seen her not only be a leader of the only Aboriginal controlled media organisation in Australia, but also lead a highly effective ground up disaster response that kept her community and the broader community safe and supported. Really different stories, but both spoke to the ability to find those pressure points, be purposeful and driven, and not wait around for the powers that be to get on with it. And then Carly's story about being a young Aboriginal lecturer, I don't want to cry, new to the world of academia, but pushing back and refusing to comply with what the system is demanding of her. I mean, that should inspire all of us to believe that our everyday actions can make a difference. And that's just vision. Now I'm moving on to voice. We definitely heard stories. We heard that stories matter, including who tells them, who they're about, and how they are portrayed. We heard from Mariam that the media is the shop front of our society and that we need to include more diverse voices, storytellers and stories, and that that's starting to happen, but it's got to continue. She spoke about how important it is that our stories are rich, powerful, and told with empathy. And Esther spoke about how we've been captive to other people's narratives and we need to stop that. We need to reclaim the narrative. We heard from Gloria and others about the power of people with lived experience telling their own story and shaping the way that systems respond. And Elle has just emphasised that for us, talking to the expertise of people with disability and how they need to be involved in the design of solutions. We also focused on how data tells a story and that speaking the language that decision makers use to convey our messages is really powerful. But the lack of data can increase our invisibility, and that at the moment we don't have good data on our sector. We don't have good data on our workforce. If we don't count the numbers, then how can we possibly plan for the future? As well as speaking though, we heard that we need to listen. Carly told us you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in that proportion. And we need to do a better job of listening to and learning from First Nations leaders and communities and from Aboriginal ways of being, doing and knowing. And then we actually need to act. It's not enough just to listen. We have 2 hands for doing and we need to follow through with purposeful action. As Michelle said, we've also got 2 feet and we need to put them one in front of the other in order to move forward. We heard that we need to make room for different voices, for people with lived experience to be part of the conversation and the solutions. Sally showed us how it was her experience of that crappy locking system and being able to then talk the language of the experts, that she was able to make sure our train system was safe and more accessible for people who are vision impaired. So a living example of finding that pressure point, focusing on one thing and executing it well. But we do need our peak bodies to step up to the plate, to be bold and to use their voice. We've got that role of amplifying voices and messages and providing the platform, and we need to be that conduit into government. We can't just talk to ourselves, we have to be heard in other arenas, and peaks have to actively pursue that. And then we come to value. We have enormous value and we deliver that day in, day out. But it is human nature to not value what you don't pay for. So we need to stop that. We need to harness the power of saying no. We heard from Richard how the care sector isn't valued and that it's neglect by design. He graphically illustrated that through his depiction of the rich white bloke who wants his kids or his ageing parents to be cared for by people who are driven by passion and commitment and who aren't paid well. Indeed, he talked about the joy that it brings these rich blokes to know that we're underpaid. And Christy really brought the impact of this home when she spoke about the disproportionate disadvantage experienced by Aboriginal women, and for Aboriginal women in our sector, it's the vulnerable supporting the vulnerable, and how absolutely shameful that is. Richard also talked about how we're being gaslit, tricked into thinking that the pie just isn't big enough, there just isn't enough funding to pay us decent wages, when all the while it's a choice. And if they wanted to invest more in our sector, they could. It's nothing to do with economics, it's all about priorities. As Dee pointed out, we need to start helping our colleagues in politics and government understand what would happen without us. We need to show the case for, if we stop doing what we do, what would it look like? What would be lost as a result? And it's not just what we do for you, local MP, it's what would be lost for our communities if we didn't do it. We also heard that we don't value our people by training them for leadership positions. We don't support them to make that mind shift, and we're setting them up to fail as a result. And then my final comment, because I'm exhausted and I'm sure you are, on values is that the values that we take when we go overseas and assist a disaster impacted community, do no harm, respect local organisations, they're the very values that we also need to see applied to our communities back home. So that is my take at this point. And as I said, I'm exhausted, but we've got a lot to work on there.
We do, and I just have a few things from an outsider's point of view, I guess, which is use this opportunity to build your supporter base now, build your advocates on your Facebook page now, and that means so when you need them to rise up, they're already there. So feed them out some good news stories about what you're doing, and then every now and again hit them up for a signature or whatever. That's really, really important. The other thing is, people hate the word brand because they think it's a marketing term, but your brand is just what people feel about you. It's not a slogan or anything like that. It's what people feel about you. And it's really, really important that you look at yourselves as brands. And that means you're out and you're busy and you're doing 100 things, and some of you have started from kitchen table organisations. Take a little bit of a step back and think, what are our values and what is our purpose? And your brand is simply the link between your values and your purpose. but you should be able to really articulate it, and every person in your organisation should be able to articulate it. Every single war you fight, every war for funding is fought using the power of your brand. And when you build a strong brand, all your decisions then get made in alignment with that brand. So when someone says, oh, can you do this? You just look at your brand and you look at your values, you look at your purpose and you say, either yes or no. Is this strengthening our brand or not? And the other reason why a brand is so strong is working for a good brand is a powerful non-monetary reward for employees. So if you cannot compete by paying money, but you have a good brand, that's the way to do it. And remember, the strongest marketing for your brand is your employees. I always say treat them like customers because they are. So building a strong organisational brand, even if you have no external marketing, is one of the best ways of keeping your organisations strong.